I'm going to greet most of you with a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I've not seen anyone who would probably need a good night. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Rajesh Tyagarajan. I'm a principal product consultant at Equal Experts, and I'm currently working with Travelopia on their initiatives. Data and AI ML projects are very notorious for being quite expensive and quite long drawn in terms of delivering the value or the business outcomes. Today, we are going to have an interesting conversation about how to get machine learning right and to make data work harder. We have Sri Balakrishnan, we call him Sri in short, who is the technology director for the innovation and products at Travelopia. He'll be sharing his experience of successfully delivering business value by transforming a challenging data project. Sri has a bachelor's degree in computer science. He was a developer, and since I work with him, he is still a developer at heart, but he loves solving business problems through technology. He loves everything that is tech, ancient Indian culture, and Sanskrit scriptures. He is joined by Simon Case, who is the head of data at Equal Experts. Simon has over 20 years experience applying data science and machine learning to create intelligent, connected systems and products for a range of industries. It is consumer goods, manufacturing, retail, wholesale, travel, telecom, you name it. He has done something around data and ML in that industry. He works both at strategic and implementation level and is very comfortable helping organizations create and implement their data and AI visions. We are planning to take some audience questions at the end of the conversation, so please use the Q&A function to add your questions at any point of time, and I'll be looking at them and presenting it to the speakers. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sri and Simon for this interesting conversations about data and AI/ML. Over to you, Sri.
All right. Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you for those who have joined from similar time zone, later time zones. Appreciate staying late and listening to this. Thanks, Simon, for putting together beautiful slides together to remind what all I need to speak. We have not rehearsed it, so if I don't lip sync against the slides, don't curse me. But I'll try to bring some story out and our learning out. And again, just a reminder, this talk is about the journey of what we did with machine learning in Travelopia rather than machine learning itself. So if you have come for a machine learning specific conversation, I think you should pick up a separate chat with Simon. He's a much more an expert than me on machine learning, but I'm going to talk about how did I approach this project as a novice to a machine learning project to at least get to deliver something meaningful through machine learning modules in Travelopia. Yeah, we'll probably go through what is Travelopia first. Maybe the next slide, please, Simon. Yeah, so for those who have not heard about Travelopia, we are a group of experiential travel brands. I mean, just to give you the variety we have, at this point, I manage about 80 to 100 domains across different geography and time zones. But it all boils down to about 10 different brands, which means 10 different types of business, which means I have 10 different MDs, which means I have 10 different ways of working. Yeah. And my role, I mean, though the title is quite heavy, what that basically means is teaching these MDs how to use technology for their transformation. And travel, I don't know how much you're familiar with. I think a lot of travel industry is quite outdated in terms of technology adoption, and it's doing a catch-up game. I think it has done quite a bit on the hotel side of things and the airline side of things, but internal selling systems, process, travel industry is generally a few steps backward compared to the other industry. So I think all the Travelopia brands are also not any different from that state. And we are trying to help each and every brand of Travelopia to kind of move forward in the technology journey. We do welcome more than 5 lakh guests a year. And we do have 2,500 colleagues, actually, not 2,000, across the world. Consultants put together will be 3,000 plus. Yeah. All right, next slide. Again, how did all this started, right? So I think most of the large companies like of our size end up engaging large consultants. These are generally the big fours, big fives, companies including KPMGs, Deloitte, BCG. They're the known consultants. I mean, they're generally very smart people, mostly double MBAs, who kind of do like an audit of the company and say, hey, what are your true assets? What are your IPs? What should we exploit more? How do we create value, right? So when this activity was conducted in Travelopia, of course, one of the things that they noticed was, I mean, so many lakhs of people, 500K people are traveling, so much of data, so much of CRM potential. And in travel industry, one of the common trend is how do we take advantage of repeat customers? Because bringing new customers is always tough. You end up paying Google more and conversion is tougher. Those who work in the marketing world know how difficult it is to do a conversion. So repeat is always something that's preferred. Referral is always preferred, right? So, but we were not taking advantage of the data that we have, doing an analysis of what people are coming for, how can we exploit the data. So the general recommendation from the consulting firm was we should do more data exploitation and we should do more machine learning data science at that point of time. This was 2018. 19 where data science, data pipelines, data lake was still evolving as a practice. And that's how it all started. But for sure, the assumption was we have large amount of data and we need to do something to get started with, right? That's how it started. Next slide, please, Simon. So what does iteration one look like? The iteration one looked like so when a large consulting company says that to a management, of course, the management is excited, right? Because there is a lot of IP potential. We should get started. Of course, the team started with technology focused. What that means is they ended up saying, okay, what machine model can we implement, right? Or if this machine model is amazing, let's do linear regression. Let's solve this problem. We should just implement this. And again, of course, as engineers, they also like hard problems to be solved. So they ended up building a massive data lake. This was done in one of the columnar DB in AWS, bring all the data together. Quite a large team. At one point, this team was like 60 people plus. And their idea was bring all this data together, put that in a large database, organize the data, start generating models, feed it back to different brands, CRMs, right? HubSpot or Salesforce, start impacting the what do you call customer journey, right? Sounds quite normal, promising, like nothing suspicious here, right? I mean, bring the data together, process the data, generate machine model, feed it back, like 4 steps to do, right? And when you retrospect back is when we feel that this was a big bang approach. When you first hear the plan, it sounds all right? But that's how the iteration one started. And next slide, please, Simon. And I mean, this is the slide that we added last minute. And when we were discussing these slides and things like that, we said, isn't it true that we all start our project with complete optimism, saying, hey, we will start this, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, and we'll organically grow. But in reality, it's a lot of output with very few focus on outcomes, right? So I think the iteration one focused on, are we agile? And it's a tick mark, right? The delivery was indeed agile, but the program itself was probably not agile, right? So were they delivering everything to production? Yes. Were the team shipping in a sprint? Yes. Is it everything cloud? Yes. Is there Jira used? Yes. Is there Slack used? Yes. Everything was a tick mark, right? So from an output standpoint, everything was green. But from an outcome standpoint, was there any one brand actively using what was built as a machine learning model to influence the customer journey? The answer is no, right? So this was a great reminder that all the projects start with sequential, oh, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. And I think, Simon, you have a great use case of the paved road, right? You want to share that here? I think
yeah, sure. So I mean, I think it's interesting. I just, as you were saying that, and as we were talking about it earlier, Sri, about, you know, what's the way that, you know, we like to develop these things. And, you know, to me, you start off lean, right? Because there's another thing about machine learning I don't think you're going to touch on, so I don't think I'm stealing anything from later in your talk, Sri, I hope not. But it's about, you don't know whether a particular model is going to be useful or valuable until you've actually started developing it, until you start creating that model and measuring the outputs of it. So to some extent, it's always a bet, right? So I think it's very useful or very important in machine learning to start off lean, right? You know, as we were talking about here. And you start off, for us, that is, you know, you start, you know, create that steel thread. What's the smallest piece of value you can get? What's the smallest slice through getting to people to do stuff. And then once you've got that, you can kind of thicken that out a bit to a paved road. You know, that's something. Then you know, right? Okay, this is how we can deliver machine learning. Right? This is an approach we've got, and so you can start, you know, putting more vehicles down that paved road. And of course, if it turns out that you know, it turns out there's a particular route that is just very different for whatever context it might be, that the end use case means that you have to deliver it in a very unusual way, who knows, whatever it is, then you drive off the paved road. But if you have that paved road in place, you know, it really helps to accelerate, I think, the adoption of machine learning into the business.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Simon. I'm also reminded about, I mean, of course, Rajesh introduced me, but he's also been a great coach to me in terms of thinking about changing my own perception about certain things. So one of the things that we often talk about is, can we start the project more as an experiment, which means that it can fail or succeed rather than assuming that this will work, right? But interestingly, a lot of projects start with an assumption that, oh, we know what we're doing, we'll solve exactly this, and this will just take us to the next level. But I think the ability to just start as an experiment and step back in retrospect often and say, did we fail? Did we succeed? Question ourselves, our own decision. Sometimes even move away if you're not able to navigate the project because maybe you're not the right skilled person to do it, right? I think that's a big, bold learning that Rajesh, you have instilled in me to kind of even challenge every questions and thoughts, right? So great reminder of how the iteration 1 was run and what in reality happened. And I'll walk you through what happened in the next phase shortly. Next slide, Simon. Yeah, so this is when we kind of realized that a lot of outputs, not great outcomes. And that's when we kind of said, we need a pivot. And to be honest, the pivot was also forced because of COVID. So I think while COVID was quite bad for all of us, sometimes it's a blessing in disguise, right? It forces you to revisit your spend profile. It forces you to rethink, what are you investing in? Why are you investing in? Is there a better way to do it, right? And that's when really my journey began in this project, saying, hey, how can we do this different, smarter, cheaper, better? And that's when the pivot happened for this project. Yeah. Next slide. And this is the story that I was sharing with Rajesh and Simon. So let's call the program first version as the 1.0 version, and what I took over was the 2.0 version, and what's currently running today is 3.0 version, right? So when I took over the 2.0 version, of course, I've been quite critical when I took over the project, saying, hey, we could have done this better, we could have done that better. Like, for example, a 500K record in my mind is not big data, right? But it's large data set, but it's not big data, right? Even if you do point in time snapshot, it's not large data in today's cloud world, right? So to my point was, keep it simple, keep it in a simple DB rather than overcomplicating it, crazy infrastructure. I was challenging every decision to say, how can we do this data layer smarter, better, rather than the existing infrastructure? So when I presented a lot of my thoughts to my board, the first comment that I got was, hey, are you the new hairdresser? And I don't know if you know the hairdresser story. The long story short of that is, assume you go to a hairdresser for your regular hair cutting, trimming, beautifying, and imagine that person shuts shops and he goes to a new place. The new hairdresser is going to look at your hair and say, hey, what the hell have you done with your hair? I think the previous hairdresser has screwed your hair. We need to do a treatment, and he'll sell you everything possible to ensure that you get all the treatments. So it's almost blaming the previous hairdresser and kind of saying that I know better than the other. So I was termed as the new hairdresser because I was challenging every decision. And I was telling Simon and Rajesh in my earlier call, it was quite emotional for me because they challenged, like I truly believed in agile and lean way of doing it. But I was probably the lone guy. Maybe Rajesh, of course, you supported me during that phase. But I kind of, it's almost like you know what the good looks like, but you have not yet proved. And the board thinks that you're the new hairdresser coming and complaining about what the previous guy has done and everything is bad, right? Of course, that was not my intent. Of course, as an engineer, like Rajesh said, I had the interest to do it faster, cheaper, and better rather than blaming. But my conversation became such a way that the board felt that I'm blaming. But again, it was an emotional time, exactly like the lady looking this way. I was also looking the other way, saying, okay, what am I going to do? I'm termed as a new hairdresser. Next slide, the story continues. So again, foundational principles, right? So we kind of stepped back. In the early days, of course, Simon helped think through the data pipeline. Rajesh stepped in as a product owner. Again, we were, from a foundational standpoint, we were very clear that let's not look at the number of people that we have. Let's look at how do we restructure our team. So the first thing that we did was, let's ensure that we have a solid business-oriented leader on our side, right? Who can tell us what the business will appreciate, what the business would want. We generally call it the business owner, so to speak, right? And then we ensured that somebody like Rajesh, who's a senior product manager, product owner, who can funnel down that business requirements into actionable items. Then instead of having a data team, database team, cloud team, QA team all separate, we said, why don't we just club it all together into a, like, so to speak, the two pizza team, right? Small, cross-functional, who can do end-to-end, including building the cloud infrastructure, deploying it, Jenkins if needed, automation testing, whatnot, right? So we built like a 6 or 7 member team, right, Rajesh? I think it was a very small 6 or 7 member team. And the first thing that we did was forget the tech. We'll figure out the tech, but let's focus on the business outcome, right? So even before talking about machine modeling, we actually started doing Excel modeling. Right? We said, okay, here is the data. Forget the data pipeline. Take the data as is, put it in an Excel, generate the model, put it back to CRM. And then the conversation became very different. We said, hey, assume we'll give you this data back to you. What are you going to do? Tell me that now, right? So the iteration 1, the model used to send back close to 40 or 50 data points, which the business did not know how to use, versus we reduced it to 2 or 3 data points, which business understood why that number is generated and how can they use, right? So the focus became less on data science. Focus became more on, assume I have an outcome, what I'm going to do in my customer journey. Assume I have an outcome from this data. How am I going to think about this? And we started with simple statistical, heuristical modeling rather than complex data science modeling. And if we do use data science model, we used it in such a way that where we could explain it back to the marketer, explain it back to the salesperson, right? And I think a lot of cost also was driven because we had tons of graphical user interface. And I think, so there was heavy enterprise tools, and it's easy to get lost with thinking that we are a large enterprise, right? And a lot of large enterprise, the definition of large, you have to always evaluate in 2020, 2022, what is large? I mean, AWS, Google Cloud has made petabytes small now, right? You can put a petabyte load and get an output in milliseconds or microseconds. So it's large is no more large, right? And then what we agreed with the exec is for an iterative development, actual iterative development, which means we develop something, we deploy something, we learn from that before we start doing more, right? So we almost were linear, doing one thing almost for 3 to 4 months or 6 months, I guess, if I remember the timing right, before we could do parallel activities, right? So a lot of time invested in just getting the cross-functional team right. And I think the peak of it, we would have been 8 or 9 people. And that's a drastic difference from the 40, 50 member team to a very lean, very focused on outcome. Interestingly, I've added 2 sub data points. So the overall cloud cost at some point was close to £1 million. And we were able to reduce that to roughly 200K. That's 1/10 the cost reduction. We didn't focus on the cost reduction, by the way. So we just focused on first principles. We just did the right things. The result was a cost reduction, right? Well appreciated by the board again. So it was a side effect rather than one of the goals that we had set aside in the project. Fine, let's move to the next slide. Yeah, I think this pretty much summarizes what I mentioned, but it's like the 40-member team into reduced it to smaller teams. So the iteration one, the biggest thing is outcome was not achieved, a lot of outputs, right? So machine learning was done, but from an outcome standpoint, we didn't really move the needle. Of course, the iteration one made everyone think about data science, made everyone think about data aware. So it was not all wasted, but the point we are trying to do is we achieved the similar goals at a smaller team. And the iteration two, 3 months, 6-member team, at least 2 models that we built that went to production, right? And one brand started using the output, and quite a lot of business value generated, which we were able to measure and progress back and saying, we invested so much, the output ROI was so much, right? End of 12, 16 months of working together, I think we had 10 models live in 5 brands with all the models used in business, right? And resulting in quite a significant improvement in business. And it almost felt like for the brand, it was more organic rather than sudden pushed onto them. So they also learned with us in the process, right? And that's on the impact. Perfect. Simon, do you want to cover some of these models? Happy to cover these, but if you want to cover, Rajesh wants to cover these models to bring a bit more, instead of a monotone.
Perhaps it's Rajesh. I mean, Rajesh actually knows more in detail these days what's going on in those models.
Yeah, just to break the monotone. Otherwise, I've been speaking for 20 minutes and half of them might be sleeping. Rajesh, you want to bring some of these models alive?
Sure. Without going into the actual the implementation details, the initial focus was like what Sri was saying. The business exec came in and they gave us the direction to say, if we have data, right, and we want to start focusing on the revenue side, right, you can think of using data in your revenue side as well as your cost side to reduce costs or increase your revenue. So since this was the starting of the journey, the business was investing in it. They were focused on the revenue side. So the question that was asked was, what can we do to use the data effectively in the revenue side? And we came up with these models, the in-market model, repeater model, and the RFV. So the in-market model is nothing but very simply, like what Sri again said, we have 80 different websites, domains running around for the 10, 12 brands we have. And we have a lot of traffic coming in. And what we wanted to help the business was to give an indication of what the traffic looks like, because there is a lot of spend happening in various medias, right from PPC, social media, and other media to get traffic to those websites. So we wanted to give them a view of what the traffic looks like and how they can leverage it. So we were answering a very simple question. Do I know the person who was browsing today? So that's the first question we were answering with this model. Yes, with cookies and stuff like that, we were able to do with user consent. We were able to track about 30% of the traffic coming to these websites. Then the next question was, what is their intent of coming to this website? Is there a purchase intent? So we were calculating the propensity to buy, which was a score between 0 to 100, basically a probability of 0 to 1 converted to 0 to 100, to be able to say what is their interest levels in terms of the purchase itself. So that was the second information that we were providing to the marketing team. The third and the fourth information was primarily on what product were they interested in. So are they interested in a specific kind of a boat to rent or a specific kind of yachts to rent? Were they interested in a specific destination to visit and so on? So we enriched that data, which was very specific to every brand as to what kind of boat, what kind of destination, what time period, if that information is available that they were interested in. So this was calculated based on the behavior of the user in the website, and the model gave a score, and then we were able to funnel it back to the team so that they can have initiatives to nudge the customer through the purchase journey. So if there is somebody who is there at the very early stages, not interacting with the website too much, not very clear about the product, then we send a communication to them about the brand, what we do, and so on and so forth. If somebody is there at a much further down level in terms of the purchase journey, then we give them very specific information related to the product or the destination that they were interested in. And we also had a subset called abandoned basket model, which is a part of the in-market model, which identified people who abandoned their baskets so that there can be much more deeper intervention that could be done to them. This could be, depending on the brand, it could be somebody from the sales team actually making a call to the customer and understanding why they abandoned, to some kind of an automated journey to nudge them back to their basket and then complete. Offers can be given, discounts can be given, and so on. So the specific data points, like what Sri said, instead of giving them a lot of data that they were not very clear about, we gave them the specific 4 or 5 inputs based on the browsing behavior of a person in the website, and enrich the data almost in near real time to the marketing teams so that they can react. Most of the models that we built in the in-market, they run on a daily batches. Depending on the need of the brand, we run near real time or daily batches based on what kind of interventions they want to do. So that's about the in-market model. Repeat model, again, answers the same similar question about how can we increase the revenue, but from an existing customer, which means we looked at the past purchase behavior of the customers, and then the model predicted, and again, answered 3 very specific questions. First question, will this customer buy with us again? Based on, again, what did they buy? When did they buy last time? And so on and so forth. It's again a score of 0 to 100, which is a probability of 0 to 1 converted to a scale of 0 to 100. The next question that the model addressed was, if they're independent of whether they're going to buy, the model will predict what products are they likely to buy, again, based on the purchase behavior of similar customers across the data set that we had. It was able to say Rajesh is going to be interested in a Horizon boat because similar people were interested in Horizon boat. So it very specifically gives the product recommendation. Then it also predicts when will Rajesh buy again. And this is where we tried to be smart. We evaluated a simple heuristic model based on the business cycles, and we compared that with the data science, and we found that the heuristic model was giving better results compared to the data science model. So I know, Simon, in a way, I know you're pretty open with this, but in general, it is a good thing to always see if there are better ways than data science models, because these are cyclical businesses that we are talking about. People rent boats in summer every year. So there was no point in trying to have a model which was very complicated to run to give a 65% accuracy, where we were able to get near 65% accuracy just by having a simple heuristic model, because the business was cyclic, and the data from the past showed us very clearly that it is much easier to implement and maintain the cyclical heuristic model than trying to have a very sophisticated data science model. So that's what we did for the repeater. So the repeater models across the brands based on the customer data answered 3 questions. Will this customer buy again from us? If yes, what are they going to be interested in? And when we think we are going to buy. And in terms of the end-to-end implementation of this model, again, like Sri said, we didn't stop with just building the model. We actually worked with the business, in this case, primarily the sales and marketing team, to understand very clearly how they're going to use this and build a journey, a customer journey to leverage this data. So that helped us in multiple decisions in terms of how frequently we should run it, what is the accuracy level we want, and what kind of data enrichment we can do over and above this at a granular level so that their communication can be much more targeted. So we had to very closely work with the business, not at the ambitious, let's try and get everything in place, but on, okay, if you're going to do these interventions, run these campaigns, or have a salesperson call people, what data would you need, and what can confidently the models provide you so that the journeys can be designed very well. So that was about the repeater model. A side outcome that happened as a part of in-market and repeater was the RFV. Till then, the businesses were struggling or were doing one-time reports on understanding the value of the customer. So we were to kind of enable the in-market and repeater to work well, we independently built what is called the recency frequency value on every customer record we had, which is we were able to augment the data in the CRM to say, when did recently, what was the recent customer? Did they buy like 3 months back or 6 months back or a year back? So recency talks about when was the last time they actually bought from us. Frequency kind of gives us a view of how many times the customer has bought from a particular brand. This to some extent gives the brand affinity, the repeat purchase behavior, and so on. So we were able to augment the data in the CRM with how many times this customer buys from us. And the last thing is the value, the total value of the purchases, which is nothing but the sum of all the money that they have spent with us. So this again helps the CRM team to be able to do very interesting segmentation based on loyal customers, high value customers, and so on to build their journeys. So all of this specific data points that the models give as output were derived backwards from talking to the business about how they are planning to use this data, how they are going to design their customer journeys. And then we backtracked it to say, okay, the model has to augment the data with these information. So these were the primary 3 models that we have built across 5 brands as of now, which is about 15 models running, all automated, like what Sri said. One of the earlier things that we ensured that was it is all automated, that there is no manual intervention, and we are not using some fancy GUI tools so that somebody goes and clicks the button every day and so on. It's all automated data pipeline with tests in place for us to know if the models are deviating from a standard set of accuracy that we know, so that we can revisit whether these models have to be retrained or rebuilt. So it's completely automated. It was built with a team of, like Sri said, about 8 people peak, 6 standard or a 6 people member team. That was the steady state, and work closely with the business to ensure that they are able to run these campaigns or customer journeys the way they wanted. And we established a weekly reporting where we are able to see the incremental value added by these models. So all this was done end to end, and it took us about 3 to 4 months for the first model / brand. But after that, we learned very well how to do this much faster. So if today Sri asks me, I want to do this model for this brand, my estimate is pretty much 6 to 8 weeks we can get it done. So that's the predictability and repeatability we have been able to do, the paved road that Simon was saying. We started with the simple path where we were trying to walk and meander and figure out a path. But now I think we are very confident about the paved road. So if a brand comes to Sri and says, I want to leverage data in the marketing and sales, and I would like some of these models to be done, it's typically 6 to 8 weeks for us to start the initiative to literally getting to production and start the customer journeys on the brands. That's the quick summary of the models, the way we implemented it, what they put as output. In terms of the tech stack, we have used simple pipelines. We went to RDBMS because we were still dealing with millions of records and not like petabytes of records. So we were able to use a simple RDBMS, RDS from AWS to be able to implement this. We use Lambdas for asynchronous pipeline management and data sync up and so on and so forth. And our models are all built in Python, so it is testable. It has a source control, versionable, testable. So the good engineering practices we were able to implement because we used a standard stack rather than something that is exotic. Simon, over to you to add any insights in terms of you did help us to structure this journey, and feel free to add anything that you want to add here.
And as I was saying before, I mean, I'm so pleased that we've been able to do this talk, because I think it's a great journey that you've gone on, and it's a great kind of set of business outcomes, but also learnings and stuff about how to do this thing well, and all sorts of things. I mean, things that really come very clearly out to me. First, the thinking about users, right? Okay, that it's quite easy to get lost in the beauty of the tech, right? The beauty of, hey, these mathematical models is amazing, this accuracy, and it is, it's very clever. It is very clever. But at the end of the day, for people like us who work in business, right? The important thing is that business value, right? And it's not the beauty of the model doesn't matter. What matters is that you are getting a business outcome that you want, and that means you need to understand what will work for the users, right? So, I mean, I think you touched on some of the things here about, a more accurate model isn't necessarily the better model, right? Because if the people using the model, in this case, the marketing team, if they're there and they're saying, well, I don't understand how this works, I don't care what you tell me about accuracy statistics, I'm not going to believe it, right? Until you can tell me how it works, then I'm not going to use it. And so that's all part, I think, of of creating a model and working out what the right model is, and all part of the process. And that, you know, extends to more than just the selection of the model type. It also, I think, extends to, there's a bit to the right of creating the model. I think people, you know, you don't think of at first when you start on these kind of journeys, which is, you know, people have got to use it, right? What's the right format? What's the easiest way for them to digest the outputs of these ML things, right? You know, is it a spreadsheet? And it might well be just a spreadsheet, right? And in your case, I love that, you know, what actually worked for us is just 2 data points. If you give us that, that will make our life easier, right? The temptation for the data scientist is to go, I can give you all this other stuff as well. Look at this, you know, I'll do it in a great report and look, all these things, right? But if I'm busy trying to sell stuff, I don't want that. What I want is, you know, the information presented in the easiest way for me. And that's, you know, I guess for you guys, you know, starting from that point, actually talking to them and going, what do you want? Right, okay, how do you do it? Okay, let's work that out. And then we'll work out the model. The model's the easy part, right? You know, most data scientists, given the data, they'll get your model really quite quickly, right? It's the stuff around it that's the difficult bit.
Exactly. And yeah, and just to add to that point, I think sometimes we also forget that these are projects done to people in sales and marketing who are not necessarily technical, for example, right? And they may or may not have background on all this, right? So I think it's important to be sensitive to their understanding of what we are doing, right? So if you start doing complex tech, the general tendency for non-tech people is to switch off rather than support it, right? So I think that's even more a reason to keep it simple and explainable, right?
Explainable is really interesting. It is that another piece of work we did for a completely different client. We created a pricing model, and quite similar, right, in the sense that we had a very kind of data science driven model, if you like, you know, an algorithmic driven data model, or very kind of complex algorithmic driven data model that we could show was more accurate. But in some cases, it gave out results that were counterintuitive, right? It was a pricing model, right? So people are selling it. I just don't believe that. Why is it like? And we could tell from the data that the model was right, but it really didn't matter that, because nobody was going to accept it, right? So we just, you know, we said, well, that's fine. People can, we have a simpler model now it's much simpler, right? Still data driven, but it's much simpler, and people can understand why it's working. And then, you know, we can get buy-in from the users for it. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really true. And that you would kind of almost apologize to me earlier, Rajesh, about using heuristics. Sorry, you never used heuristics. It doesn't matter, right? You know, if that's the right thing, if that gives you the right output that gets the buy-in as well as sufficient performance for it to be usable, then that's okay. And it might well be, you know, you can get a thing with very complex data models, right, or data science models, that in actual fact they're overfitting to the data, right? You know, they're actually modeling too tightly to the data that you've seen. Right, so they're not. So as the world changes, they don't change very well. Simpler models are always better if you can do them.
Yeah, I think one other thing probably me and Rajesh maybe should disclaimer is we have not done data science projects in the past in our life. We have done good software deliveries in the past, and one of the challenges that we had was how to demystify this data science world, right? Because everyone whom we spoke when we took over this project, I mean, all buzzwords are thrown around us, right? And we were kind of, okay, can we navigate? Are we the capable people? Can we even do this? Like, at least I was very conscious of saying anything in the first 3 months because I was not even sure, am I saying the right thing? Is this how we approach it, right? And you need some wins for us to feel confident about, okay, this approach makes sense. But we were very focused on generating business outcome, right? So the focus was there, at the same time demystifying the data world, right? So I think now we feel much better saying that, hey, this approach would make sense. And thanks to you, Simon, for making us feel at home to do the right thing rather than going behind the buzzwords. But it's a journey even for people who are starting this data science journey. It's easy to get lost in all this buzzwords and data lakes. All sounds very quote unquote very fancy, sexy, beautiful. They're like, wait a second, am I in the right place, right? So yeah, looking back, it feels we have done the right thing. But when we were doing it, it was a journey for us too. right? So Rajesh, would you agree to that?
Yes, yes. I just want to remind the audience that they can put their questions in the Q&A section so that we will be answering them.
Yeah.
With that thing, yes, Sri. I think broadly, we were very clear about two things. One is we were clear about the engineering best practices that we wanted to implement, that we borrowed from a typical software development lifecycle, which is clean code, testable code, versionable code, and automation in terms of the pipelines and so on and so forth. So we borrowed those values from the software engineering development, but we were also cognizant of ensuring that it can be channelized and customized to our data execution requirements and be able to do it, and the iterative way, which is, while the data lake would be an eventual outcome where we have all the data, cleaned up data, more insights and stuff, that was not our goal. Our goal was more business outcomes that can be driven by these models. And invariably, the data lake itself is getting to build.
Yeah.
And that it's interesting as well.
I guess,
so carry on, Sri, carry on.
No, finish your thoughts.
No, I just you know, the working with data. So that's what's different from a software, from an ML ops point of view, if you like. You know, in our playbook, we talk about it being, there's a dual track process, right? You're managing the software, which is standard software development, or should be, right? But it's also, you're kind of managing the life cycle of the data that's used to create the outputs. And I think that's a bit different for people, and that's the thing that maybe throws people off a bit. But I so agree with what Rajesh said there about borrowing from software, that the good practices. That it's taken a while for the software development world to kind of come up with, right, this is the way we make stuff now, and that's how it's there's data around that. This is, if you want good testable kind of software, then these are the practices that you take. And in the data world and the machine learning world, it's a little bit behind in some cases for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know why they're not quite so receptive to those practices. I think it is catching up now, but the more we can do to make the world aware that it's still a piece of software, right? You still need to put these things into place. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with kind of proofs of concept. And by adopting those practices, you're able to have models that you can and kind of operationalize systems that you can keep amending and keep iterating over. That's my point.
Yeah. Because we're getting some questions already,
sure.
Right?
I'll first ask the question first to you, Sri, and Simon, you can add more thoughts. There is a mention about the beauty of the model doesn't matter, right? And the person who has asked this question, Shalmali, has partially agreed with it. But the question is, how do I, as a pure data scientist, develop this business acumen?
Yeah. I mean, I can answer from my perspective. I'm sure Simon can bring in his perspective. I think, to me, I go back to foundational principles, right? So one of the first things that we did was, let's all work together as one team. It's not your team, my team. So even thinking as data science as a separate stream, QA as a separate stream, coding as a separate stream is not how we approached it. We said the business leaders need to come into the call, the product owners come into the call, data scientists come into the call. We all meet daily stand-up, weekly calls, retrospects all together, right? Remember, there is a worse problem. The business people also don't understand data science. The data science don't understand business too. So it's not just your problem. The problem is we're all in this together. And I generally refer these things as like a cricket team or a football team. Yeah, you have people with different, like a batsman, bowler, keeper, but we all need to come together as one team. So the principle that we worked in, which is bring all of us together as a single team, and we'll have shared learnings. And data scientists come more to the left, which is understanding business, and the business comes to the right, which is understanding technology, right? So that's how I saw it. And that's how we cross-learn, and that's how we kind of have empathy towards other functions and other teams. And I'm sure, Simon, you can add more to this journey because you've gone through a similar journey.
100% agree with that, Sri, 100%. And that, the cross-functional team, you in a team, right, in a good ML team, you need at least to have the data scientist, the data engineer, and the business owner together, right, working together, because they need to kind of overlap in their things. And if, as a data scientist, I think your question here is, I'm a data scientist, how do I improve? I think the things to bear in mind are, talk to the business owner about what they want to do, and try and keep away from kind of technical explanations. What's the thing you're trying to get to? What's the business outcome you're trying to get to? And when you kind of talk to them, try to present the outputs and try to present what you're talking about in ways that are useful and meaningful, sorry, to them. So things like F-scores and confusion matrices and stuff, we love these stuff, right? Because it helps us optimize the algorithm, but they're not very useful for a business person. So try and find a way of saying that actually what you should say, the good way of doing it would be kind of, hey, let's say we've got a propensity to buy algorithm here. With this algorithm that I selected here, I can get it 70. I can find the person who's going to buy next 70% of the time, whereas in this one I can get them 80% of the time. And so explain it in those terms, and so the impact on them in the business terms, and keep talking to them, right? It's so important. Great data scientists, do work with the business people. They should be your strongest allies, and you should be theirs as well.
Yeah.
So in summary, I'm seeing two things. Sorry, go ahead, Sri.
Now, I was just saying, there's also something, I've kind of learned over a period of time of the watermelon effect, right? Like the outer watermelon is always green and inside of watermelon is red. And generally what we tend to do as individual functions, as data science, I've done the model, so it's green. But if you dissect one layer further, it's actually red. The business is not able to use it. So I think we have to always remember the watermelon effect when we do any projects, right? So are you seeing green because your function has done a good job, or as a whole, are you green, right? To get the whole as a green is perhaps what me, Rajesh, and my business stakeholders focused. How do we get all of us together green? And doesn't matter if it's a small green, but important is to get that green right, not the red, right? So I think that's a mental model that I generally tend to use to see together, are we getting a small green versus a big green by one function, right? So yeah, Rajesh, you were summarizing, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just summarizing. One is the structural intervention, which is if you are siloed as a data scientist, figure out ways of working where you are able to work together closer, have more conversations with the business owner. So there is a structural change that you can bring in to develop that business acumen. And the second thing would be, as an individual data scientist, be curious about how your output is going to be used. Be genuinely interested in seeing, hey, what are you going to do with this data, and how you are going to improve the life of the customer or improve the business value and so on, so that you can backtrack it and then be able to present your analysis, your insights, your model in the way that the business owner can really relate to and understand. So one is structural, which is figure out ways of working where you're part of that conversation and part of the whole team. The other is an individual attitude or mindset where you go ahead with full curiosity of, why do you want this model, or why do you want my output, and how are you going to use it, so that you can better present your analysis and thoughts in a way. I'm going to move on to the next question. Very interesting one addressed to you, Sri, mostly is how do you best manage the expectations of your board so you don't end up over-promising or under-delivering, especially on the AI/ML initiatives?
Yeah, good question. I think I'll step back and think about something else, right? In the sense that generally these days in projects, when I start, I answered this earlier by saying I kind of start with an experimental mindset, right? Saying that, hey, I don't know if I am your right partner to deliver this, but I'm going to test and learn or experiment with what you told me to do for a certain period of time, right? Let's call it the steel thread. Let's call it the initial paved road of the first few meters, right? I think generally what I've seen is people start with setting a deadline and saying, let's work backwards and hit the deadline, which I think is a completely wrong approach, because the moment you set deadline, you start compromising. So the approach that I've started taking is, okay, let's a quarter or two, let's try doing some things together based on some of the philosophy that I've learned, that you have learned, that's important to you. See if you're able to deliver something meaningful, even before talking about scale, even before talking about the program going to multiple partners and things like that, right? So I think before you branch, start really small. That's number one, right? Number two, I think the big success to what we've done in Travelopia world is we managed to identify a strong business partner who thinks business first but it was also friend of tech, right? We generally call this role the business owner. They have nothing to do with technology. They purely look at technology as, can the technology deliver something meaningful for the business to consume or not, right? I think we were quite blessed to have this particular person in our team who really navigated what the tech was saying and what the business wanted, right? And because this person that we selected also has a sales and marketing background, it was super easy to communicate back and forth, right? I think to me that was the second thing that really helped. And the third is, I think this goes back to what Rajesh said, it's like a small lean team who could do end-to-end, deliver something meaningful, even a simple Excel model, heuristic model, even before we expand more, right? So I think reducing the scope, having the right internal stakeholder management, having a squad which can do end-to-end is the starting point to start talking about the initiatives. And if this team can get that right, I think of course we can scale this. But I think to me that was the what do you call starting point. I don't know if Simon, Rajesh, if you want to answer that.
I'm going to just summarize. Go ahead, Simon. Go ahead.
So I guess a couple of points from Mike. One is that I mean it's a really good question, because I think compared with other areas of software, it's always suffered from over expectations, right? AI, right? And because hey, it's AI, right? And people see something, they see a program that can play chess. Well, if it can play chess, surely it can solve these other problems. And actually, it can't. It never can. It's still, you create an AI solution for one thing, you've then got to try again for a whole other thing. So it's very common. And the thing that I like to kind of, the way I like to kind of think about it is, is to remind people that all AI is a bet. Until you've done that first experiment, you don't know. I've done propensity to buy, right? And typically that works out pretty well. You can get some pretty good performance results from it. But I've also done propensity to buy situations where it's come out as random. And we've had the whole team and we've looked it up and down and left and right and all sorts of things. And it's random, right? It just happened for this particular product. There was no special kind of preferences across the population, right? Weird, but hey, that just happens sometimes. And you don't know that until you've tried it. So I'd love what you guys did, which is like we're going to do the simplest thing here is we're going to try some stuff out here on Excel, right? And see if that gives us some value. And I think that's quite a good way to start. The danger there is that you get stuck in the trap of it's another Excel spreadsheet that's going around the business. So you do want to have a path from the, okay, we've proven it out, we've proven that there's value here. Now we need to create a productionized solution, I think.
Yeah, I'm just going to summarize from what I'm hearing and from Simon and Sri, right? One is please present to your board probably any AI/ML initiative, especially if you're starting for the first time, as an experiment. This is something that we will have to sell to them, saying this is going to be an experiment, and try to create something smaller where the team can prove whether it is going to work. So the experimental mindset probably is point number one. Point number two, what Sri was suggesting was also about have a team that can productionize it, like what Sri said. Have a team that has in the past proven that it can do it, so that there is a trust that even if you do start small, it's all Excel and stuff like that, it's not going to be that process, but it is going to be converted into software and then delivered to production. And the third one, but this is probably the most important one, is identify an influencer in the board who has a similar mindset, who understands and values the uncertainty of AI/ML projects, who can then be your partner, understand you better and present it to kind of get a consensus in the board, and vice versa. Help us understand the concerns of the board so that we can address them in a better way. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead for the next questions. We have more questions coming up, and we might go a little bit overboard, probably a couple of minutes to just answer the questions. I don't want to leave questions unanswered, so I'm going to move to the next one, which is, do we have any tips on identifying potential new use cases for ML models within a business where it can deliver actual business value? I'm going to take a shot at it because I'm a product person, and then Sri and Simon, you can kind of argument it. Normally, when I think about any initiative with outcomes, you start with, can we add revenue? Can we bring in costs? Or can we reduce risk? Or can we increase customer experience? These are the four broad buckets, we start with. Sri and I also work on something called a KPI tree where we start with these four things, right? Are you bringing in more revenue? Then what are the things? More revenue means more customers, which means marketing, sales, use cases. Or are you trying to bring in, cost efficiency or operational efficiencies, which means you're trying to bring in, data insights to see how can I reduce the number of people, number of steps, and so on and so forth. You can start looking into risks. Can we reduce risk, fraud risk, legal risk, and so on by, again, using the data that we already have? And finally, can we improve the customer experience, which can be completely overlapping with any of this or completely orthogonal, where you can think of use cases about how do I improve my customer experience because you're able to use the data that you already have with them, either with or without the model. So I start with this four buckets, and once the business is able to tell where they want to focus based on their business strategy and the current environment of the business, then we can go deeper to talk about very different ways of using this data in multiple use cases. Over to you, Sri and Simon.
You're on mute, Sri.
No, super aligned with Rajesh what you mentioned. The other area that again, sales and marketing are generally the highest impacted for any business. And one other thing that I also tend to do is look at people like Google have spent enormous amount of research, both in sales and marketing. There are a lot of standard models that they've built. I've never seen really need for really building new types of models, but I think if you look at what Google AWS has done, there are a lot of use case and studies. That's generally my inspiration to go look at what are these guys done? What are the models that's publicly available in use case? So I think that's potentially one way. The second way that I generally tend to do is speak to smart senior sales and marketing leaders to say, hey, what are you struggling with? What more do you want? Like, what other data will help you do your marketing better, sales better? So I think since you mentioned about new use cases, I generally start with what's already there as use cases. Also talk to the industry experts, leaders, network with them to understand how they think about this. And that's probably a good start to look at what else will fit or what else can we explore and help the business think about new ways of using ML. Yeah.
So I think there's not much more I can add to that. Kind of covered it so well. The only thing is, I guess the only other extra angle I could put on top of that is that I always think there's two ways that businesses use data, and they're either using it to find out more about their customers and improve the way that they what they understand about their customers, or they're using it to improve their operations, so improving the way you do risk or improving the way you send parcels around the world or whatever. And so you can always think of, take those two lenses and see if that helps you, identify possible use cases. And you talk to different people in the business depending on which ones of those are more interesting to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon.
One watch out I would say, Munira, would be I just also realized that we never approached this from looking at new use case for ML models. We looked at what does that business wants and how can ML solve it, right? So I think slightly different approach. But we find the approach that you've taken is much better for our use case because that's fitting into solving a business problem, and ML comes in rather than force fitting an ML model. So just to watch out on not going in the rabbit hole of finding ML models. Yeah.
We'll just take this last question, which is about accuracy. It talks about, over the time, how do you know that it is still accurate? And do you do fine tuning over the course after it is deployed? And how do you know the model predictions are correct and what it's learning indeed is what you want to learn? Again, I'll answer it from the specific, being the PM of this particular initiative, I can answer, but then Simon and Sri, you can add more. Before we even started the initiative in terms of actually building the model, we try to understand from business what is their threshold of accuracy, because this is something you have to define and decide a little bit upfront rather than trying to run the models and then trying to do 90, 95, 99%, and then you're going crazy about it. We were able to say, if you're able to get about 70% accurate, that is good. If you get more, that is wonderful. But we are not killing ourselves to move the needle from like 89% to 93%, right? and so on and so forth. So we were able to agree on an accuracy. In some cases, we analyze the data. The quality of the data becomes a limitation in what level of accuracy you can bring in. So once the analysis is done, we again level set based on the accuracy of data we have. What is the cleanliness of the data kind of drives the accuracy of the model. So we have that conversation with the business, and then we put the threshold as a part of our tests, so that if we find accuracy going wacky out, then we have to look at what is going on to see if the market has changed, our data set has changed, or something else has changed. So we put a threshold so that we know within the boundaries it can go up and down based on the day-to-day variations. That is what we have deployed, and that is what we are monitoring. And we also measure the business outcome. So we have a weekly and a monthly report that very clearly attributes the value or the change in the customer behavior that can be attributed to the interventions made by this model. So we have an immediate metric, which is basically the numbers we are seeing in terms of predictions. We also have a lagging metric in terms of the actual business outcome that is getting affected by this. So we keep an eye on both of this to say, is something going out of bounds for us to relook at either retraining the model and things like that. So that's what currently we have put in place, as a practical solution at Travelopia.
Yeah, and again, just to add on to it, in fact, I was just seeing my emails, and I get a weekly Monday email which exactly talks about the gross metric, saying, okay, did we move the needle? Did it really bring in new revenue? So that generally tells you that things are working fine. On a completely different topic. I sometimes also like the models to fail constantly in production. We also get to know if people are using it. So if there's a lot of noise saying, hey, this model is not working well, it's a good way to validate that your customers are actually using it, right? So sometimes a forced failure on the production is also not a bad idea, right? So let it slip. At least somebody shouts about it saying, this is not accurate. Then it's a great engagement that the business is engaged with what you've built, rather than it's a hairy arm story, right? I mean, you need to kind of the business feel the pressure of it's not working and come back to you and saying, it's not working, it's impacting my sales. Then you know that you're building something very beneficial for the business, right? So I sometimes let it fail. I mean, it's a secret. Hope my Travelopia brand people are not listening to this.
Chaos testing for data. We have a
chaos
new
testing.
idea.
I like that. I was thinking exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, good stuff.
Wonderful. Thanks. Really appreciate all the time. The audience has stuck through the extra time we have taken. Really, really appreciate it. And have a wonderful day. We do have a next ETO session coming up shortly. Steve, do we have the details? Yes, it's coming up right there. Feel free to join us in the session. We're going to talk about how we do ops in Wayfair. So it'll be awesome to learn about how you build it and how you run it at the Wayfair. One of our other customers who are very, very good in doing this. Thank you very much, Sri. Really appreciate the great insight you shared today. And thanks, Simon, for supporting us all through the initiative and this webinar. And really appreciate. And thanks, Steve, to helping us with the logistics. Really appreciate. Thank you all. Have a great day, whatever is left based on your time zone. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye.